Over the years, I've spoken with women who have experienced atrocities one can only imagine. But through their hardships, they shared how they found their strength, their voice, and joy in life again. And while they shared with me these brave stories, I listened in awe and admiration. I didn't know if I had it in me to face my fears the way that these women had. But on my own journey, I would come to understand that not only is courage something we choose, it's a movement. And to understand how these women's stories would be pivotal for me, I want to share with you the adventure that I've been walking for almost 4 years now, one that I'm still on today. In 2014, I left my home in Oregon to walk my way around the world. Now that probably tells you my sense of adventure is very slow. Walking allows me to connect to the people, the environment, and myself as fully as possible. Now, I often do get asked, if I wanted to go on a walk, why didn't I just go hike the Camino or walk the Pacific Crest Trail? But the thing is, I wasn't looking to go walking, nor was I even seeking an adventure. I wanted to feel the world. My walk is not about counting the kilometers or checking off the countries. It's more like an experiment of living on less, trying to give more, relishing solitude while immersing into the world. Now, ambling around the world is a decently crazy idea, particularly for me. I'm an introvert. Before I began, I had just done a few short day hikes. I had never camped alone, didn't even really build a great campfire. Looking at a topographical map or navigating with a compass was a foreign language. I was simply a woman with a compelling idea for an adventure, one that would ultimately have me dismantle my cozy life. As you can see, I was essentially trading in pencil skirts for thermal underwear, a career for homelessness, and putting my few belongings into a cart, quickly elevating me to bag lady status. Because I do pick things up off the side of the road that are useful, and I carry all my rubbish until I can dispose of it. There are 4 guidelines that I live by on this walk. The first is self-sufficiency. So I carry all my own food, gear, and supplies in a cart that I've named Athena. Second is affordability. While I try to help raise money for organizations that support girls and women, the only way that I can afford to do this is I give myself a budget of $5 or less a day. And that means I always camp outdoors, and my dinners are usually 2-minute noodles. The third is intuitive mapping. So my walk is not a continuous line. I walk country by country, and it's shaped usually by my gut instinct, where I feel called to go. Sometimes it's the people I meet, what's happening in the environment or politically that shape where I walk next. And lastly is walking every step myself. So no form of transportation helps me to cross the country I'm walking. Now, before I began, I did know some of the challenges I might face, like losing toenails or not showering for days, turns out sometimes weeks, exhaustion, loneliness, and extreme weather. And then there were the worst case scenarios that I always knew were a possibility, especially being a woman walking alone. And my worst fear would take place. One night in Mongolia that would forever change my visceral understanding of courage and strengthen my determination. It was spring, but the ground was still heavy with snow. I had walked 23 miles, I made camp, and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I watched as the sun set over the undulating hills of the steppes into utterly perfect solitude. Now, I had already endured heat stroke in Australia and dengue in Vietnam, so I was feeling a little seasoned, perhaps a little overconfident and comfortable. but I was still surprised and unprepared when a Mongolian nomad made his way into my tent. That was the longest night of my life. It felt like an eternity as I sat in a ravine trying to grasp the reality that I had just been raped. Every woman's nightmare, and the very reason that women are so often discouraged from even attempting solo adventures in the first place. I felt shame, and I felt like I had failed in some way. But as I sat in that ravine, I began muttering memorized poetry to calm my mind and my body. And in this moment, I went through some self-blame, thinking about how I could have done things differently or prevented it. I felt like I had let down all the women who feared this for themselves or even for me. But as I moved past those places, I came to a place of acceptance of what just took place. And that's when I could see two choices clearly in front of me. I could give up and go home because the fear that this could happen again could be just too overwhelming. Or find the courage to keep walking. I was alone in a muddy pit in the middle of Mongolia. I was terrified. I had limited resources. And that's when I remembered. I remembered those fearless women, the ones who had shared their stories of pain and triumph, who had endured brutality but found peace and love. I could see their faces and hear their voices. They were human, like me. They were women, like me. And this was the moment I was beginning to understand that there was no difference between the women I admired and myself. They chose to step towards what they feared and discover what they were capable of. They chose courage. So could I. By the time the sun rose that morning, I had made my decision. And as I put one foot in front of the other, with the faces and stories of those women encouraging me, I became more determined than ever to keep moving. It started with footsteps, but as I kept walking, it expanded. I was walking west, but I was walking towards forgiveness, towards joy and humor, trust and love. We're not alone in our fears. And by standing up and telling our stories, we are connecting and encouraging each other. It felt like I had finished walking across Mongolia with several women holding my hand and heart. And as I continue walking today, I make efforts to meet with local women so that we can share our stories and connect through our experiences. So I see courage as a verb. It's a motion because you can't do it standing still. When we know what we're afraid of, it is the very action of moving towards it that is courageous, not the end result. It is the movement forward. And it doesn't take a grand adventure or a crisis for us to choose courage. It takes courage to start a business, to take a risk, to follow your heart when everyone else wants you to do something different, or to love in the face of rejection or pain. I now know that it is the willingness to be afraid and to be totally and completely vulnerable in how we live our lives as we step into our challenges. Courage is a practice, and it's when you keep walking that you find it. Thank you.